Well, it's not the best Marvel movie, but it's also not the worst. So this evening, late afternoon, early evening, I went to go see Black Widow. It's been delayed so many times. It was supposed to come out last year, I think, and this is something that fans have been asking for a while, and finally Marvel's like, okay, here's your Black Widow movie. And my first impressions of it, now maybe if I rewatch it, I'll feel differently about it, but my first impressions of it are that it was pretty enjoyable overall. I went into it after I'd been hearing some rumblings, some discontent expressed about it, saying that, well, I think there was a review that had been posted by some feminist reviewer, and I don't even know if they were a guy or a girl, but they were saying something about how that it puts men in their place and it makes them squirm and it passes the Bechdel test, if that's even the right way to say it, and I don't even care because I think that test is dumb. And from that, I don't know if from that the narrative started that the assertion had been made that this was not a movie for men. Because that line has been repeated over and over in different places on social media, and I can't find where this originated from. So unless someone can point me in the right direction, I'm getting the feeling that that line about it being said that it's not for men, I think it comes solely from that review that was made by a pro-feminist or whatever. And I went into it a little worried that it was going to be, just heavily anti-male and it was going to be all this. And honestly, I really didn't pick up on that for the most part. I mean, if you want to go into it and say, well, the widow program and it's anti-woman and all this, well, I guess you could. I mean, the program was a pretty vile program to begin with. They were pumping out these spies. They were implementing forced sterilization on these women, but I don't really see that as some sort of overarching men are bad sort of narrative. This was something that was started by a vile government, ideology, communism, and at the same time, they were smart to use women because women are often underestimated when it comes to things like, subterfuge and whatever, which I don't know why, because women can be pretty dang devious. And so the whole Black Widow program, that makes sense to me, that they would do something like that. But I don't necessarily pick up on this just overreaching sort of or overarching anti-male thing. I really didn't. The main bad guy, the big bad, because in the Marvel movies, they always have the stereotypical big bad. And the fellow who played Ray Winstone, I think that's his name. I'm so terrible with names, but I know exactly who he is. I've seen him in so many movies. He was like your stereotypical big bad, and he was definitely misogynistic. He made some sort of comment about females being, oh gosh, what did he say? He made some sort of, like he was explaining why he went after women because they were like the most, what was the wording he used? Shoot, I'll have to put it in the text here. But basically he was insinuating there's way too many females. So we just took the ones that were abandoned, neglected or whatever, and we used them, we turned them into these widows. So he was very clearly inclined that way, anti-female or whatever, but he's a bad guy. That's kind of to be expected. But in general, I didn't pick up that the tone was that narrative. So I was happy about that. There are several things that I enjoyed about this movie that surprised me that I enjoyed them as much as I did. And one of them, I'm just going to get this out right away. One of them is Florence Pugh. She absolutely stole the show. Stole the show from Scarlett Johansson. And this is supposed to be Scarlett's movie. But she was so much fun. She was the best character in the whole movie, as far as I'm concerned. And I wasn't expecting that. Maybe I'm so enthusiastic about it because I wasn't expecting it. Florence Pugh and I didn't get started off on the right foot, I must say, because my introduction to her was through the movie Midsommar, and I hated her character in there. She was the most annoying MC in a movie, and I didn't have much sympathy for her. After a bit, it started to wear thin. Her character just really started to rub me wrong, and so I just didn't like her. And I saw her in a wrestling movie, and she was okay in that. And so when I saw she's going to be in this, I'm like, oh. But she's great. So that was just a case of me transferring the annoyance of the character onto the actress. Now, sometimes there are characters that annoy me as well as the actor who's playing them. But in the case of this, that's apparently not the deal. She was wonderful in here, and I thought she did just, well, I've already said she's wonderful. She did a great job. Another thing that I liked in this movie was to me, I felt like there was a bit of depth to the characters. This movie succeeded in many ways where, in my opinion, the absolutely lame-ass film Captain Marvel failed. Because Captain Marvel was not an interesting character. It didn't help she was played by an actress that I am not a fan of at all. But her character, just in general, was not interesting. She was not well written. She didn't have a character arc. She didn't have any character growth. She was the exact same person at the end as she was at the beginning. Now, Black Widow, we've already seen a lot of her sort of character development through the different movies. We've seen how she's kind of evolved. I mean, she hasn't evolved dramatically, but you've seen the struggles that she faces. It's kind of sort of, I mean, it's been a thread throughout many of the Marvel movies. I think we got the first taste of it. Well, we got a little taste of it in Avengers. In Iron Man 2, not so much, because she was the new person on the scene and we just didn't get to know her character very well at all. And then in Avengers, we see a little bit of it, but maybe not really, because I think in that particular scene that I'm mentioning, that was when she and Loki were talking, she was just acting. But it kind of felt like at the same time that he was pushing her buttons. She mentioned something in, I think, the first Avengers about her ledger had been in the red and she was trying to make it black or something like that. Like, make it to where she was balancing out or compensating for all the bad she had done. They do make a reference to that also in this film, which, I remembered that comment that had been made in the Avengers. But in this one, I feel like she's ultimately the same character, but at the same time, you see a lot of things that she struggles with internally, stuff related to things that happened in her past that she did, that she feels very, sorry, smacked an insect off something. Things in her past that she feels very conflicted about or guilty about, as she should. She did bad things when she was in the Widow program, and to get out of the Widow program, she did bad things, or at least one very bad thing that haunted her. And they touch on that. They don't just touch on that. They delve into that for sure. And so she remains an interesting character and the stuff that she has to deal with internally. So she has grown on me. I've made no secret of the fact that I was not real happy with her as the choice of Black Widow. When she first showed up, I did not like her at all. I was not a fan of Scarlett Johansson. I did not like how she played the Black Widow character in the earlier movies, which ties around to something ridiculous that she said recently, Scarlett Johansson, about, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was something about that she felt in Iron Man 2 when she first showed up, and maybe some other movie she referenced, that her character was treated like a piece of ass or objectified or whatever. And I thought that was really ridiculous, because that's the type of character her character is. She's this spy. She uses her feminine wiles. She uses her body to get to her objective or to accomplish her objective. So why are you complaining? Plus, Scarlett, you hammed it up a lot in those earlier movies. I mean, there are scenes in The Winter Soldier. That is my absolute favorite MCU movie. I mean, it made my top 10. But there's some of the stuff she does in there that's really cringy, like when she smacks somebody and then she struts away and she's, doing this real sexy walk, and it just looks ridiculous. But she was really playing it up. So her complaints about that, to me, are extremely lame. She had said something a while back that I thought was, yeah, I actually agree with you about that. You're completely correct in my opinion, where she was talking about how she felt like an actor's job was to act, don't get involved in political stuff, which certainly that's every actor's right. But once they do that, they really run the risk of alienating a lot of their fans, which they do a lot of times. And I don't think it's smart for them to do that. And she was saying that. And so I was like, yeah, I agree. I agree with that. But then she turns around and says this other stuff. And then I think she's recently said something about how women in Hollywood are underpaid. I guess she's talking about the actresses. And it's like, do you not understand basic economics, and especially Hollywood economics? They're going to pay you according to what they think you're going to bring in. And so I don't really get on board with that whole narrative about the wage gap, especially in Hollywood, because come on. They're already hugely overpaid anyway. I mean, I guess you could say no, if they're bringing in this money, that's not, they're being overpaid. But compared to normal people, they're overpaid. Anyway, well, that was a little side note that had nothing to do with the movie, but whatever. What else? I'm trying to remember the different things that came to my mind as I was watching it. Oh, as always, stay to the very end to watch the post-credits scene. You might think, oh, there wouldn't be one because Black Widow is dead, but there is one because there are characters that have been introduced that it seems to me like they're going to be around for a little bit, which is pretty obvious at the end of the in the post-credit scene. So that was kind of cool. I'm sort of interested to see where they're going to go with it, and I am not exactly sure how that's going to tie into a future movie, but I feel like it's going to tie into an upcoming show, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you see the scene. Some other things that I enjoyed about the film was the dynamics and the interactions between the different characters in here, specifically between Black Widow and her sister's character, and then also their interactions with their mom and dad, who you find out early on, which you would have already known it if you knew about Black Widow, but her mom and dad were not her real mom and dad. They were basically, okay, if you've ever seen the show Americans, think that's what they were. In the beginning of the show, it shows that her and her sister, there were kids and they were in a sleeper cell, basically, is what it was. Except in the Americans, they really had the man and the woman really had the kids. But in Black Widow, the two girls were these young girls given to them by the program. And so it was fun to see their interactions with each other and the uneasy way they kind of felt about each other, as adults now interacting. When the girls were kids, they were like, Mom, Dad. But then they're adults and the girls are resentful at the way they had been raised and how it wasn't real and they were so young, So you feel a lot of sympathy for the girls in that respect. And you feel a bit of disgust for the adults in this situation because Rachel Weisz and David Harbour, that's how you say his name, they were agents and they were just playing this role, but to the kids, they formed these attachments to them. And so they were disillusioned to find out the reality of the situation. It was heartbreaking to them. But at the same time, you can still see that there is some attachment there, even from the adults, to the children. So it was nice to see how that played out. And, but fundamentally as a whole, for the character of Black Widow and her sister and all the widows, it kind of made me sad to just think about what they went through, the indoctrination that the brainwashing that they were put through. And yet, of course, Black Widow, she was able to break free of it. Now, the other widows, some of the other widows in the later programs, they weren't as easily able to break free of that. And you find out the reasons why. That's explained because the methods of the brainwashing or indoctrination that were used became worse. And I don't want to say too much because this is a non-spoiler review, but that's kind of sad. At the same time, that aspect of it felt a bit cheesy to me, but I can't say too much about it, or it'll spoil it. So I'm going to hold off on that. I had seen one critic complain about the sort of humorous and kind of flippant way that the character of Florence Pugh talked about her forced sterilization with her father, and they didn't really think that was appropriate. They didn't really care too much for that, the way she did that. But to me, I didn't feel that way, because in Avengers 2, when Black Widow talks about it, it's very serious to her. You can see it's something that pains her. And Florence Pugh's character is a completely different personality. She's very snarky and humorous and kind of jokey, but in a snarky way. So the way she talked about that, to me, that wasn't anything that felt inappropriate. It just felt like it was part of her character. So that was just something that I wanted to mention. That's not really a spoiler. We all know that that's what happens to the widows. Okay, I knew I was going to forget something. And this was something that as soon as it happened in the movie, and it was referenced multiple times after that, I made this mental note, you've got to mention this because it is so stinking hilarious. And I loved that they came around and did this, that they acknowledged this thing in Black Widow. So when she first made her appearance in Iron Man 2, she's running around and she's flipping her hair and she's doing all these poses and flipping her hair and doing her, and I noticed it, and it was really annoying in the first movie. And she continued to do it in all of the other movies, not quite to the same extent maybe, but certainly she would do the posy stuff where, and that is highlighted and poked fun at, and it's hilarious. And I just wanted you guys to know that, and I'm so annoyed I forgot to mention that when I was sitting here during my longer review. So I'm going to find a place to insert this, and that's it. Okay, back to the review. So far, most of the stuff I've talked about has been what I liked about it. So now I'm going to delve into things that were kind of like, and they're not really a huge deal. Certainly didn't ruin the film for me. I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to, because when I went in, like I said, I was a little concerned, but that sort of went away. But some of the stuff that kind of like is, I guess, as with all MCU movies or just over-the-top action films, over-the-top sort of stunts and flying in the air fighting and cars crashing in such a way that is just not possible hardly at all that anyone would have survived. And Black Widow is not a super soldier. She's not a demigod or anything like that. She's not a god. She's not super. She's human. She could get killed. And yet it's like, you expect me to believe she survived that car crash, or, just so kind of that typical over-the-top Fast and Furious types, over-the-top ridiculousness. And when they do that too much, it kind of takes away from it. It sort of diminishes the feel of danger. You also go into this knowing that she's not going to die, which is another problem I have, and a lot of Marvel fans have, is that this movie should have come out a long time ago. This movie should have been the first Marvel MCU female-led movie instead of Captain Marvel, which was a complete waste, in my opinion. I think that was a huge misstep on their part. It takes away from the suspense and the drama, because it's like, well, she's going to live. Now, other characters you don't necessarily know. So there were other characters I was concerned what might happen to them, because you don't know. But so there was that. Other stuff, things that I noticed in the sort of negative-ish side, was that some scenes didn't feel as fleshed out as it seemed like they needed to be, but that actually happened more towards the end, because the first 2/3 of the movie, I've been seeing it described as boring, but in my opinion, it wasn't boring because I've mentioned before, I like downtime in action movies because if it's too much over the top action, it wears thin. So I liked the downtime. I liked the character interactions, the character drama type stuff that was going on. I appreciated that, which made the action scenes that happened more enjoyable. But the last third of the film, it felt a bit rushed and crammed together, and as they were trying to get it all done, and it sort of fell into that stereotypical or formulaic type of situation. And it also felt like the way the bad guy was treated in here, like he was just your stereotypical big bad guy. He just, think that evil guy that wants to take over the world, that sort of dude, So I don't know. He never really felt like a huge threat, honestly. So I don't know. I felt like he was kind of thinly written, or poorly written, I guess you could say. A bit formulaic, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But the Marvel movies typically are. But this was all so formulaic when it comes to just your stereotypical action, big action, and bad guy type sort of villain, or how they're just over the top, like James Bond type villains, that sort of thing is what he reminded me of, this character. As far as the premise of the movie, it's a revenge film. Scarlett's character is going after the big bad guy because he's the one that's responsible for basically all the bad things that happened in her life before she joined the Avengers. I mean, everything. She's basically going after him because of what he molded her into. So she's using the things that she was taught under him and the program that she was forced into to go after him. So it's ultimately a revenge film, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's just what it was. Okay, so I think the final thing that I had sort of quickly written down that I wanted to try to remember to bring up was, I had mentioned in the trailer my suspicions about a certain character/characters. And my prediction sort of came true in one aspect, but then at the same time, it didn't. And I'm not going to say anything because if I do say something, that's going to spoil it. But honestly, if you've been paying attention to the trailers, because I have seen multiple people mention this, not just me, but if you have been paying attention to the trailers, you will know exactly what I'm talking about when you get to this particular character. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, the other bad guy. So I guess you could say you've got the main bad guy who's Ray Winstone, but then you've got Taskmaster. That character felt more like the big bad that you're aware of, but doesn't really end up coming to great fruition. So like the Winter Soldier, he was this big bad, but he held up. Basically, the big badness of him was supported and followed through with all the way to the end. With Taskmaster, not so much. And like I said, I'm not going to get into too much more talking about that because that will also be spoilerish. But it feels like Taskmaster was almost more of a presence in the trailers than in the movie. So it was a little disappointing, but also I don't know. I feel like of all the villains, Taskmaster was one of the weakest-ish ones. I mean, the costume is cool and everything, and the fighting is awesome. The abilities are awesome, but the character in general, as portrayed in here, I don't feel like a very good job was done with that. So it wasn't enough to take away my enjoyment of the film. I think that this movie in general is going to do quite well this weekend. I'm glad that it's going to do well. I think I saw numbers of it possibly making up to 100 million this weekend. I don't know. The theater that I was in it looked completely full to me. They're not segregating the seats anymore by party. the entire row I was in was full, and all the rows I could see in the theater were full people side by side by side. So I think it's gonna probably bring in quite a bit of revenue and help the theaters out. Well, the theaters don't get a whole lot in the very beginning, but still, if it has staying power, then they will benefit from that. And it makes me happy to see people coming back to the theaters. This is certainly a movie that is, I think, enjoyable more on the big screen because it's, you know, the action and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, that's all I can think of right now to talk about with regard to this movie. I personally wouldn't mind seeing it again on the big screen. I don't know if I'll get the chance. My kids are going to go with some friends, but I don't think I'll be able to see it with them that day. So I don't know if I'll be able to make it back to the big screen to see it. But I think if people like it enough, probably they will end up going back. And I think that's it. Oh, I know what there was something else I was going to say, but it's not related to Black Widow, sort of, kind of. But I think what I'm going to do this coming Monday, so this video is going to go up before Monday, but this coming Monday in the evening, I think I'm going to have my monthly just chat live stream sort of deal. I know it's in the beginning of, it's in the middle of the month. The last time I had one was at the end of June, and then we had some other live streams talking about movies of the 90s and stuff like that. But the reason that I definitely do want to do a live stream, or I'm strongly thinking about doing a live stream, is because June 12th is the 2-year anniversary of my first upload to this channel. When I say first, I had done an upload in November, but I've unlisted it because it has nothing to do with it. That was about like decluttering or something, and it has nothing to do with what my channel is now focused on. So I wanted to kind of do that to sort of mark the 2-year anniversary thing, and maybe during the course of that we can talk about Black Widow if you guys have seen it by then. If most of you haven't, I don't know, you know, it's Monday, it will be pretty soon. I don't want to spoil it for people, so I don't know. We'll see. I'll just play it by ear. Okay, that's all I've got to say about this for right now. I'm going to wrap it up. I've got to edit it so I can get it up in time for tomorrow. Well, it's already tomorrow, so I got a lot of editing to do. Okay, guys. Adios.